Good morning. We move to general questions. Question number 1, Annabel Goldie.
To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to deal with reports of increases in binge drinking at home.
Cabinet Secretary Alec Neil.
Presiding Officer, the increase in home drinking in recent years is being driven by the availability of cheap alcohol sold in the off-trade and mainly in supermarkets. The introduction of minimum pricing will raise the price of the cheapest alcohol, and our proposed 50p per unit minimum price will have a significant impact on alcohol sold in the off-trade. We have already taken action which contributes to reducing binge drinking. These include reducing opening hours of licensed premises, powers for licensing boards to consider over-provision of licensed premises in their area, and introducing a ban on quantity discounts in the off-trade.
Annabel Goldie.
I thank the Minister for the response. Presiding Officer, in Renfrewshire and Inverclyde, the police are being increasingly called to attend at very violent incidents arising out of binge drinking in the home. Now, usually the perpetrators have a history of antisocial behaviour which is known to the landlord. Will the Cabinet Secretary request his colleague, the Minister with responsibility for housing, to consult with housing associations to consider how there might be an earlier and closer engagement with local police when such antisocial behaviour becomes apparent, to avoid escalation of that behaviour into the troubling pattern of violence now emerging?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the member raises a very valid point indeed, and we have been working with housing associations and indeed councils in their roles as landlords to try to tackle this situation. But there is also a particular problem in some communities in the private rented sector, because it is very difficult, while social landlords feel a social responsibility, some people who are landlords in the private rented sector don't feel such a great responsibility. And of course, the new Housing Act that comes into force this year will give local authorities new powers to ensure that those who are landlords in the private rented sector will be forced to take a much more robust approach to dealing with any of their tenants who are engaged in antisocial behaviour.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the Alcohol Focus Scotland report published last week showed that alcohol-related harm costs Scotland £3.6 billion per year, and it's a clear indication that licensing boards should carefully consider implementing a standard of use of the powers given to them by the Licensing Scotland 2005 Act, such as the over-provision policy? And does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that there should be a consideration for actually strengthening the legislation and to encourage local authorities to do that in the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, on the latter point, that's primarily a matter for my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice. But nevertheless, in terms of the general drift of the question from the member, I do agree with him. I do think in many areas there is over-provision, and that contributes towards the problems associated with alcohol. Speaking as the new Cabinet Secretary for Health, I would emphasise to the Chamber also the impact on the health service, particularly on our A&E services, where a very high proportion of admissions have a relationship to drink and the abuse of alcohol. And that's an issue that I'm going to take forward on top of the initiatives taken already by my predecessor.
Question number 2, Marco Biaggi.
To ask the Scottish Government how the Procurement Reform Bill will incorporate and advance the principles of sustainability.
Cabinet Secretary Nicola Sturgeon.
Sustainability is at the heart of our public procurement reform programme. The bill will signal the important role that sustainable public procurement can play in supporting our economic recovery. It will call for a culture change in how public bodies procure goods and services to deliver social, environmental and community benefits. The consultation paper on the bill proposes measures to support innovation, create jobs and to ensure that procurement processes and systems are transparent, streamlined and business-friendly.
Marco Biaggi.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer, Deputy First Minister for her answer. When the bill was first mooted, it was being discussed as primarily a sustainable procurement bill, and clearly it has now expanded given the adaptation to circumstances. Can she provide any further and clearer reassurance that the bill can effectively serve all three of those functions that she set out, social, environmental and community?
Cabinet Secretary.
I hope I can give that reassurance to Marco Biaggi. I know he's got a very close interest in this issue, and I'd be very happy as this work progresses to meet with him to discuss his perspective in more detail. As he rightly says, Sustainable Procurement Bill was an early working title which is now changed to the Procurement Reform Bill, which I think better reflects the overall aims of the bill. Of course, ultimately the title of the bill is a matter for Parliament, but we are very clear, and I'm very clear, that whatever the bill is called, it will seek to make clear the legislative framework for procurement decisions and support the greater use of social and environmental benefit clauses. And I think it is important to note that the consultation seeks views on placing an overarching duty on public bodies to act in a way that promotes economic, social and environmental well-being through procurement activity. So I hope I can reassure Marco Biagi both today and as this work progresses that sustainability is very much at the heart of our plans.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I ask the Cabinet Secretary what input the relevant professions have had in the formulation of the procurement pre-qualification questionnaire?
I'm happy to write to Linda Fabiani with a detailed response to that in terms of specific stakeholders, but can I give her an assurance at this stage that both in terms of the specific point she raises about pre-qualification questionnaires, which are extremely important in the whole procurement process, but also generally in the decisions that we are about to take, the process started by my predecessor, Alec Neil, to reform the procurement process, then hearing from the views of stakeholders, those whose livelihoods often depend on getting these processes right, will be absolutely essential. Already this week I've had some discussions with construction interests about the particular concerns they have and will want to see addressed in this process. So again, the same offer I made to Marco Biagi, I extend to Linda Fabiani. I'd be delighted to meet with her so that I can hear the concerns and the suggestions perhaps that her constituents may have in this work.
Question number 3, Jean Urquhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assistance it can give to families with children where some family members are required to leave the country due to their immigration status.
Minister Alison Allen.
Where the child of an immigrant family remains legitimately in Scotland after their parents or carers have been removed on grounds of immigration status, local authorities are required by Parts 1 and 2 of the Children's Scotland Act 1995 to safeguard and promote the welfare of children in their area who are in need and offer necessary support to their families. This can include a range of interventions, including a formally looked after child, if appropriate. The Scottish Government encourages public authorities to follow the Getting It Right for Every Child approach to address the needs of that child and take action through coordinated planning and review of progress. Our proposals for the Children and Young People Bill seek to strengthen this approach and to support those seeking asylum or granted refugee status. We are providing funding of £1.65 million during 2012 to 2015 to the Scottish Refugee Council in order to provide information and support.
Jean Urquhart.
I thank the Minister for his response. Can you confirm that children and young people in education are supported by their school in situations where some members of the family are required to leave the country due to immigration status?
Minister.
Yes, obviously local authorities have a responsibility in that area, but the Scottish Government does work with local authorities to ensure that such support is provided. The Government also provides support to a number of agencies who work in this area. I can think, for instance, of Bridging the Gap, of the Greater Pollock Integration Network, Maryhill Citizens Advice Bureau, Maryhill Integration Network and others. And we are providing over £800,000 worth of support to these organisations which work in schools and elsewhere between 2012 and 2015.
Question number 4, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to encourage new business start-ups in Kilmarnock and Irvine Valley.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
The central objective of the Scottish Government is to build sustainable economic growth. To that end, across East Ayrshire last year, some 1,500 businesses were assisted by the Small Business Bonus Scheme and some 280 new start-ups were supported by the Business Gateway.
Willie Coffey.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? He is right to point out, of course, the very positive effect that the Small Business Bonus Scheme is having. However, some difficulties do remain in the crucial first year of establishing a business. Would the Minister give further consideration to this to see if any additional help and advice could be offered that might allow more small businesses to get through that important first year?
Minister.
Well, Willie Coffey is quite right to point out that the difficult economic times make it hard for small businesses. That's why the Small Business Bonus, which has helped some 85,000 businesses in Scotland with maximum of £4,500 of assistance per annum, £3,000 more than in England, has been of such a massive help for small businesses throughout the country. In fact, as a former small business owner and manager myself, I cannot think of any policy which has done more or helped more for small business since 1707.
Question number 5, Michael McMahon.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met Strathclyde Partnership for Transport and what issues were discussed.
Minister Keith Brown.
The Deputy First Minister met Strathclyde Passenger for Transport on Monday to mark the refurbishment of Hillhead Station as part of the subway modernisation programme for which the Scottish Government is contributing up to £246 million. They discussed subway modernisation and the artwork at Hillhead Station.
Michael McMahon.
I thank the Minister for his response. Recently, both the village of Hollytown and Whitehill in Hamilton, two of the most isolated communities in my constituency, lost vital bus services. I understand that SPT has submitted to the Minister a 10-point plan which attempts to improve the delivery of commercial bus services for the ordinary passenger and local communities. Amongst its recommendations, the document advocates a statutory obligation placed on bus companies to consult with public transport authorities in advance of proposed service cuts, leading to proper engagement with elected members and communities to protect bus users in places like Hollytown and Whitehill. Does the Minister agree that the current position of the free-for-all in the market, which is adversely affecting most local communities, is no longer sustainable and that the SPT 10-point plan should be given serious consideration?
Minister.
First of all, can I say that the SPT 10-point plan is being given serious consideration. It's the subject of discussions within the bus service users and providers group that we've established, not just for that purpose, but generally to look at bus issues. And the member raises the issue about reducing bus services in some localities. And I should just say that we have almost exactly the same system as was the case under the previous administration, a largely deregulated system of bus provision. And so it is the case that it's up to individual bus operators as to which services they provide. There is currently, of course, an obligation on them, if they're going to change services, to go to the Traffic Commissioner and give notice in that way. But what the member is referring to is a larger consultation before that happens. And as I say, that's been given active consideration at this time.
Question number 6, John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how the Minister for Public Health plans to help people who misuse drugs.
Minister Michael Matheson.
Drugs misuse is a complex issue that requires close collaboration of health, education and justice policy. Since 2007, we have taken forward a number of measures to tackle drug misuse, including having turned waiting times for drug treatment from as long as 1 year for an appointment to a maximum of 3 weeks' wait to access treatment. And we're on target to deliver this target by March 2013. We've increased funding by 20% to frontline drug treatment and recovery services to a total of £162 million. And we've also developed a prevention and education programme which has seen the lowest reported drug use amongst young people in a decade.
John Scott.
I thank the Minister for his answer, but he will be aware that last year there were 47 drug-related deaths in Ayrshire and Arran, an increase from 31 the year before, and one of the highest levels by population of any health board in Scotland. Of these, heroin was implicated in 16 deaths and methadone in 26 cases, and methadone prescriptions have increased from 46 to 56,000 from 2008 to 2011. And while in 2008-9 there were 29...
Can the member just get to the question, please?
Okay. So while I accept that methadone may have a place in terms of drug rehabilitation, what further changes will the Minister pursue in order to reverse this extremely concerning trend?
Minister.
Well, I think it's important to recognise that any drug-related death is a tragedy in itself. And a whole range of measures have to be taken forward in order to make sure that we tackle the scourge of drug misuse in our society effectively. That's why it's important that all government portfolios who have a role to play in this area work constructively together to make sure that that happens. And I know that the Minister for Community Safety and Legal Affairs has been looking at a number of measures that can be done to make sure that the methadone programme is one which is robust and one which is being used appropriately. I'm sure the member, as other members in the Chamber will recognise, is that there is no single solution to this issue, and that clinicians and those working with those who have a misuse problem also have to have a range of options available to them that they can utilise in tackling someone's drug habit as well. But no doubt we will continue to look at what measures have to be taken in order to address this issue.
Question number 7, Kevin Stewart.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the possible impact on its anti-poverty strategy...
Can we get Mr Stewart's mic on? Thank you.
What discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding its contract with Atos for carrying out work capability assessments?
Cabinet Secretary Nicola Sturgeon.
The Scottish Government has regular contact with the UK Government on a range of welfare issues. Michael Matheson wrote to Lord Freud, the Minister for Welfare, on the 11th of June, highlighting concerns about assessments. Contracts for the work capability assessments relate, of course, to the reserved areas of welfare and benefits. As such, they are funded and awarded by the UK Government.
Kevin Stewart.
Presiding Officer, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that with the Atos contract to administer assessments for personal independence payments in Scotland, North England and the Isle of Man costing the taxpayer £206,703,507, that the money could be better spent paying for 55,332 vulnerable people's DLA for a year with an average weekly payment at £71.84, and that this flawed DWP contract is a complete waste of money?
I think Kevin Stewart raises a very, very serious point, and every member in this chamber will be aware of concerns like that Kevin Stewart has raised being communicated by our constituents on a regular basis. The Scottish Government has made clear our ongoing concerns about the work capability assessment administered by Atos Healthcare on behalf of the DWP. While Atos Healthcare delivers the work capability assessments within the terms of its contract with DWP, ultimately, of course, it is the Department of Work and Pensions, the UK Government, that are the decision makers on all disability benefit claims-related issues. And I have to say, I think some of the concerns that have been communicated by Kevin Stewart and others underline just why it would be so preferable if the Scottish Parliament was a decision maker on all matters relating to welfare.
Question number 8, Ken McIntosh.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will publish its plans for broadcasting in an independent Scotland before the referendum.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
Full details of the Government's proposals for independence will be provided in the White Paper to be published in November 2013.
Ken McIntosh.
Can I thank the Culture Secretary for her reply, although I had hoped she would expand on the plans outlined by the First Minister at the Broadcasting Conference in Edinburgh last month, in which he intends to replace the BBC in Scotland with the equivalent of the Irish broadcaster RTE, but potentially part-funded by advertising. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how losing programmes such as David Attenborough's Frozen Planet, or Ken Bruce on Radio 2, or Radio 5 Live's coverage of the Olympics, or access to the network of BBC correspondents across this country and every country around the world will actually improve the broadcasting or listening experience for most Scots? What
Cabinet
one
Secretary,
benefit of this parochial vision improves Scottish broadcasting?
McIntosh. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, with independence, the people of Scotland will be able to enjoy more homegrown content, including a Scottish national broadcaster, building on the existing staff and assets of BBC Scotland, while also enjoying the same programmes and channels as they do now. And can I say to Ken McIntosh, the biggest threat to the BBC currently doesn't come from the SNP government, it comes from the UK government. If he wants a future tied to the UK government and 10% jobs cuts, that's the biggest threat to the BBC.
Question number 9, David Stewart.
To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it's had with the business community about the Air Discount Scheme.
Minister Keith Brown.
The member may be aware that I visited the Western Isles in July when I announced the extension of the Air Discount Scheme to volunteers and employees of third sector organisations. Whilst in Stornoway, I met with senior members of the Council and local business interests when the Air Discount Scheme was discussed.
Very briefly, please.
Will the Minister reintroduce business to the scheme to ensure that we kick-start the economy in the North?
I've answered this question a number of times. We can't do this because the scheme, as described by the European Commission, is aid of a social character. It doesn't apply to businesses. That's why we've extended it. And can I say to the member who has raised this a number of times, if he can put forward a legally based proposition which he then puts into a budget, then we'll see if he's been serious about this or just politically posturing.